So before we get started, I'd like to just welcome all of you while people are coming into the session. And if you want to go ahead and in the chat box, you can just go ahead and introduce yourself, your name and your role. If you've attended a webinar before, if you're on a Mac or a PC, and your chat box is over on the right-hand side of your computer, about where I'm pointing with my pointer tool. You can just go ahead and introduce yourself there, and I can get a little idea of who's attending. So we've got some PC folks and at least one Mac folks and some people who are experienced in doing webinars and not. That's great. If you experience any technical problems while we're going through this, you can call this 800 number and talk to WebEx technical support. But let's launch into the topic of this mini model that's demonstrating some of the Kairos Learning webinars, and this is interviewing skills for hiring managers. So welcome aboard. I wanted to jump right in and talk about the most challenging thing about interviewing. And so what I'm going to ask is, like Jill has done, to go ahead and put your marker tool in a box and use your text tool, which is the T or the A tool, to go ahead and answer that question for me. And you can think about that for a minute. What's your most challenging thing you find in the interviewing process as a hiring manager? And you want to use that T or A tool to allow you to type, and then you want to be sure to click on that again so that we can see what you're writing. So Athena's thinking about finding the right fit. And some of the rest of you, yeah, getting through all those resumes and looking through, you know, maybe at this point hundreds of them. And John has a little bit of writing there. What did you put, John?
Writing perfect position descriptions that bring the right candidate.
Yeah. So trying to be able to do a good job of being able to get the right people in prior to even doing the interview process. And Jill's talking about assessing the fit of a client. So let's take a look at some of that as we move forward in the webinar. And again, this is an abbreviated session. We're not covering everything we would do on this topic. There are many pieces to the selection process, as you can see from these slides, that are talking about looking at the job description like John was talking about and creating that, screening the candidates like Krista was talking about, doing some interview preparation so that you're asking the right questions to be able to successfully conduct an interview, and then being able to evaluate them and bring them on as new hires. We're going to take a mini peek at the conducting the interview piece and doing some of that evaluation. And some of what you want to think about in that process is successful selection is really looking at not only determining do they have the skills to be able to do the job, but is there a cultural fit for the candidate that you're wanting to bring on board. And you also want to talk to them about giving them a realistic understanding of the position so that they can make a decision if it's a good position for them. And you want to sell them on the organization. But what I'd like to do right now is take a look at this one section on cultural fit. And I use a cultural fit model that is looking at candidates' competency level, matching that against their fit. So are they skilled in the job, and do they fit in the organization? Now, I filled in this one right here that says, well, if they don't have the skills and they aren't a good fit, you probably aren't going to hire them. But I want to talk a little bit more about box A, B, and C. So let's go over, and as a group we can take a look at this. If you're determining cultural fit in an interview, what do you say about your organization's culture, and what kind of questions are you asking to determine if there is a cultural fit? Would they fit? What are you all saying? And if you want to put that in chat or raise your hand or just talk, any of those are fine. Jill, I see your hands up, so why don't you go ahead. What are you doing in that interview to determine cultural fit?
Well, one of the main things in regards to our organization's culture is we describe how really highly team-oriented the group is. It's a large group, but it's very, very tight. We have very peak, fast-paced times of the year, and then other times it kind of dips off. But the main thing is because it's such a tight-knit group, finding the right fit for our organization is really, really important. So the types of questions that we do ask are a lot of the open-ended situational types of questions, asking for examples from the candidates of times where they have demonstrated extreme levels of teamwork in working with other people, giving us examples of how they handle stress, giving us examples of just how they work effectively with other people or what other people would say about their working style.
Mm-hmm. Those are all really nice questions about, give me examples on your style, how other people describe your style, and, tell me examples of how you handle things that might mirror situations in your organization to determine the fit. Now, Athena, what do you ask when you're doing this? Because you also had your hand raised. Any questions you're asking?
Generally we ask people to give us an idea of the work environment that they thrive in. So an environment that works well for them in terms of, how communication occurs, the pace, the values, preferences, things like that, to really, again, open-ended, similar to the last person that spoke, and help them articulate, what environment, and really we're speaking about the culture. So that's where we get underneath. The other thing that we do is we may have a chat, because oftentimes these days candidates will have gone to our website and looked at our values. And so we have a handout, and we talk about the values and what it would be like for that candidate to live those values at work. And that's been really interesting, because you can start to see how people, if it's a fit or if it's really just very different from them, or if they haven't thought about it, which happens sometimes. They say, yep, okay, that company looks good, but they actually haven't really looked at our values, which as a values-based company, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I like that, showing folks the value page. And Krista, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think it's nice also to look at the history of the candidate. What was the culture that you're coming from, and how did you fit and not fit, so that you can kind of hear how they describe themselves based on their history. And then you can see how that might apply to your own future or to your organization.
Yeah. And if we look at a little bit of a different way on this model and say, okay, if you're going to hire someone into box A or box C, what would happen? So here you have somebody who's highly competent in the job, but they have a low cultural fit. What's going to happen to that employee? What are you going to need to do to help orient that employee if you hire them into box A? Any thoughts from any of you? And you can just talk. You don't need to raise your hand if you have a thought on that.
One of my first thoughts, Kathleen, this is Jill, is that in that situation I would really want to set that person up with a mentor, someone that can kind of give them a sense of what that culture is like, what they can expect, how they might maneuver politically within that culture. And as a manager, I'd really want to check in with them regularly and just get a sense of how things are going, what issues are coming up, and keep that communication flow moving.
And what about if you're hiring somebody into category C? So they are a very good fit for the organization. Maybe they've worked in a similar environment, but they don't necessarily have all the skills for the jobs, and you know that bringing them in. What are you going to need to do to help them be successful?
Did you want me to answer again?
Sure.
Okay. first thing that pops into mind for me would be to make sure that person gets some really good training, depending on what we have available at the time for that particular person, but set them up with some training, perhaps even have them shadow some other people that they would be working with so that they can get a sense of what the competency levels are, what it looks like, and where we hope that this person would be in a certain amount of time that we have established with them once we've hired them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to add anything to what you might want to do if you're bringing on someone in A or C to make them successful in the organization? Anything else?
Well, obviously, if there's a low skill set but high culture fit, then I would probably want to make sure. Obviously, it must be a trainable skill set, or I wouldn't have brought them in. And I'm going to have to do a lot more high touch. So I might actually meet daily instead of weekly or bi-monthly as the supervisor to make sure the person knows exactly what they're needing to do. I'd use more of a tell or a directive style up front and then pull back when possible.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So I think you're all saying, you really need to be mindful of determining if they're fit, and then if you're going to bring them in knowing that they aren't the perfect fit, which to me would be box B. They're really competent and they fit in the organization. If not, that you might need to do some other things to help them be successful.